is Tea Krulos. There's a little. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
It's a fun name. Yeah. So thanks so much for coming along. Do you wanna introduce yourself? Tell people a little bit about what you do and how you came to write this book.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for having me. So my name's Tea Krulos. I'm a freelance journalist and an author. I live here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So I do a lot of freelancing for local publications, but I've also authored 4 different books, and all of them are about kind of unusual subcultures, I guess I would say, social movements, stuff like that. So I was working on my first book in 2010, and that book was titled Heroes in the Night, and it's about a subculture of people that call themselves real-life superheroes, and they adopt their own costume personas. And some of them, have sort of a mild approach where they'll try to do like charity or humanitarian things, but some of them actually try to get out there like the Batman and stop crime from happening. So I was working on this book, and one of the early things I started doing was I started a blog on the topic. So I would just post about people I had met and research I had done. And one day in October 2010, I got a message, and it was from Richard McCaslin. He said, "Hey, I found your blog, and I think you might be interested in talking to me, because back in 2002, I had adopted my own superhero persona, the Phantom Patriot, and I raided this place called the Bohemian Grove, and I set it on fire." And I was like, what is this guy talking about? So, I went to Wikipedia and looked up the Bohemian Grove and was very fascinated by that story. I was like, I don't know what this guy is talking about, but this is a very weird story for sure. So I started researching that, and I got back to Richard and said, yeah, I'm real curious about how you got to this place and everything. And that started, which was pretty much an 8-year-long relationship with this guy, where I talked to him via letters at first. He actually hand wrote me letters, and then we stayed in touch, and I slowly learned everything about his life. And he would tell me about different conspiracy theories that he believed in, because he was very hardcore conspiracy theorist. So, he would tell me about something, and I would research the theory and talk to him about it. And, I slowly developed this book over the last 10 years, really, and got to know him pretty well all the way up until he died in 2018, and I'm sure we might talk more about that later.
Yeah, for sure. So this guy Richard McCaslin, he was the Phantom Patriot, and his story checked out. It was all true. And so you wrote this book, and it goes on. I think we'll cover the basics of that and the Bohemian Grove and so on. But what I found really, really interesting about your book is that it goes on to talk about something that I talk about quite a bit, which is this sort of underlying conspiracist narratives that pervade American culture, and how they're sort of like seeing a resurgence now in QAnon type conspiracy theories. Those same kinds of ideas. I think Richard McCaslin thought that he was going to, go in and go into the Bohemian Grove and take on these Satanists and potentially even be able to save some of the children that they might be abusing there, that he believed that they were abusing there. You have obviously the Comet Ping Pong guy with his rifle. You have the lady who turned up with a truck full of knives to try and assassinate Joe Biden, the guy with the armored truck that blocked off the Hoover Dam, and so on. But all sort of, at least in my opinion, motivated by those same sort of underlying narratives that have been present in in America, at least as far back as like the 70s that I can think of, right? And probably a lot earlier, really. I mean, you could definitely tie it into like fucking Salem and shit, but the sort of modern day repackaged Bud Libel stuff seems to sort of pop up in the 70s, like post-Vietnam sort of era. Do you want to sorry, am I on the right sort of wavelength there for you?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It seems like it's something that's very prevalent now, but it has this long history that goes back, like you said, many decades for sure. I would say the more modern conspiracy. I mean, you could argue that the beginning of the country was, sort of founded on conspiracy theory, but definitely the assassination of JFK, I think, was a major turning point for a lot of people. And that's really, when I first started the book, I think I was really interested in Richard because I thought he had a very unique, unusual story. And he was sort of a stereotypical conspiracy theorist in that he was very much a lone wolf type of guy. He didn't have a lot of friends. He didn't have a family. But I think a big turning point for me while working on the book was probably in 2015 because Trump announced his candidacy. And shortly after he announced his candidacy, one of the first media appearances that he did was he went on the Alex Jones show. And Alex Jones was a huge influence on Richard. He is the reason why Richard heavily armed himself, put on a superhero costume, and raided the Bohemian Grove. If he hadn't seen Alex Jones' documentary on the Bohemian Grove, and it's a documentary, by the way, quotes, I don't think that he would have gone down that path, or he might not have. So I was like, this is very interesting because someone who's running for president is on the show of the guy who influenced Richard. And, it really snowballed from there in 2015. Like you said, there was a Comet Ping Pong raid, Pizzagate, QAnon, which all kind of culminated in this horrifying scene January 6th at the Capitol. That was pretty much an army of Richard McCaslins, a whole crowd of QAnon believers.
And I want to be clear there because there's a huge variance in the people that showed up for the January 6th riots. You got everybody from patriot militias like the Oath Keepers to neo-Nazis like the NSC 131 Club, to like hardcore QAnon people, some evangelicals, and so on. But at least what I would say is they were all motivated by the same lie that came out of the QAnon community and was like fostered by the QAnon community, that the election was fraudulent, especially with the Dominion voting system stuff was very, very QAnon centered. Do you think that all those people there could be classified as QAnon, or do you think it's more accurate to say they were influenced by QAnon?
No, you're right. There was a mix of QAnon and militias like the Oath Keepers, the 3%ers, the Proud Boys, your run-of-the-mill MAGA people. But I think that they all believed a conspiracy theory, which was that the election was stolen from Trump. And, that's what motivated them to be there that day.
Fair enough. All right. So if we go back to the beginning of the story, we talked about the Bohemian Grove, and I think I featured Alex Jones's documentary, or at least clips of it, on my own channel a little bit earlier in the week. But can you tell us a little bit about the Bohemian Grove, what McCaslin perceived it to be, and what it actually is?
Yes. So this was the first, thing that I dug into when I was working on the book, and I, really became kind of obsessed with researching the Bohemian Grove. So it's a retreat. It's owned by the Bohemian Club, which is headquartered in San Francisco. And, in the late 1800s, San Francisco was a pretty new city, and there was a group of mostly writers and artists who got together and formed the Bohemian Club because they wanted to have an organization that would help promote the arts in this new city. But as is often the case, they didn't have a lot of money, like a lot of artists don't. So they began to invite people into the club that were bankers and businessmen. And I think the scales started to shift a little bit. Became a club that was more about the prestige than the arts. So they bought this land in Northern California and slowly developed it over many years. It started out as sort of a rustic camp, but they began to build some structures in there. And people who are members of the club are free to go there any time of the year that they want. But there's a big event called the Midsummer Encampment every July. And that's when most of the members show up. And they pretty much spend 2 weeks partying in the woods. They drink very heavily, and there's a lot of entertainment, and they enjoy recreation like swimming, bird watching, whatever. But the thing that has always made it a conspiracy classic is that they do this opening ritual to kick off this midsummer encampment. And it's a performance. Some of the members dress up as druids in these, like, robes with hoods, and they have torches, and they do this ritual in front of a 40-foot statue of an owl. And during this ritual, they burn an effigy, which they say represents their worldly problems. It's called dull care. The cremation of care is the ceremony. And so by burning this effigy, they're sort of saying, we've gotten rid of our worldly hassles, and now we're free to party here in the woods. But, a lot of or people who have seen this have interpreted it to be a satanic ritual, that the owl actually represents Moloch. And, some people have even speculated that they're burning an actual human in front of the owl and not just an effigy.
Yeah, I mean, the clip in the Alex Jones movie, there's a lot of very loud screams, and he describes it as a Luciferian Babylonian religious ceremony ritual or something. Like, it's very it's a huge jumble of words, but
yeah. And in reality, and I actually had an opportunity. The reason we know some things about this, besides Alex Jones, Alex Jones snuck into the Bohemian Grove, and he recorded this ritual with a hidden camera. But over the years, there's also been several other journalists who have snuck into there. And I had an opportunity to talk to Philip Weiss, who wrote an article for a magazine called Spy. And he had snuck in there throughout the entire 2-week encampment. And he kind of just, walked through the woods, and he had a copy of the Wall Street Journal under his arm, and he held a empty martini glass in his hand. And he just pretended like he belonged there. So he and all of the other journalists, except for Alex Jones, all pretty much agreed to the same thing, that it's kind of just like older, powerful men reliving their frat days, where they're just drinking and socializing with each other, and that there's nothing more sinister happening there than you would maybe find at a golf course or something like that. So, but Alex Jones had this very sensational spin on it, and he produced this documentary, and it became sort of a underground hit at that time. It was sold via DVDs, and it was shown on cable access channels and stuff like that. So
it's a pretty huge thing. And so the subject of the sort of I want to say first part of your book at least is the Phantom Patriot, Richard McCaslin, and he saw this documentary, and he So he was one of these regular street superheroes, and I've had a look at some of his comics. It seems that he tried out a whole bunch of different alter egos before he settled on the Phantom Patriot.
Yeah.
And actually later tried to sort of change himself into the Revelator, but obviously he was famous as the Phantom Patriot, so that's sort of how he ended up appearing until his death, pretty much. Every video I've seen him in, I don't think I've seen him apart from his weird superhero TV show thing that he tried to do as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he so he watched this, and he already sort of saw himself as a real life crime fighter, and he was aghast at the horrors that he thought were going on in the Bohemian Grove. And so yeah, can you tell us a little bit about what he then decided to do?
Yeah. So to back up, I think it's an important part of his life is superhero comic books. When he was a kid, his parents did not have a really good relationship with each other or with him. They were abusive to him, and he needed a sort of escapism. And for him, I mean, this was obviously before the internet and stuff like that. So escapism for him was reading superhero comic books. And they really took a hold of him. And in fact, his entire life kind of revolved around them. He said that after high school, he joined the Marines because he viewed it as being a sort of superhero training. And then as early as the 80s, he had adopted his own persona. The Lynx was the name of the superhero. And he even recruited one of his friend's younger brothers was sort of his teenage sidekick named Iron Claw. And they went on some patrols. He grew up in Zanesville, Ohio, which is a pretty typical small town, middle America. But they patrolled for crime together in 1985 and 1986. And he really loved making costumes. He was a very early cosplayer. Way before it was a popular thing to do, he was making his own costumes of like Spider-Man and Wolverine. And he would, pose for a picture in his costume and then send it in to Wizard Magazine, was a very popular magazine about comic books, or to the comic itself, so they would print it in the letters page. So he always had this sort of love and desire to be a superhero. But he went through this really difficult time in his life in the late 90s. He lost both of his parents. He was an only child, so that was very difficult for him. He lost his job because he had gone home to visit his dying parents. And there's a number of other things that just weren't working out for him. And I think that he was very lost and really wanted something to fill this void that he was feeling. So he saw this Alex Jones documentary on Austin Cable Access. He happened to be living in Austin at the time. And I think he was just like in the wrong place at the wrong time. He saw this documentary and he was like, this is the answer that I've been looking for. I'm going to go, bust open the Bohemian Grove and expose the satanic pedophile ring and stuff like that.
So, sorry to interrupt you. Do you think I really like that you included a lot of his sort of backstory and his life there, because it allows us to sort of sympathize with and humanize him. Because he's a person who obviously was going through some shit, right? You don't take the actions he did unless you're you have some rather odd beliefs and you're probably having a bit of a difficult time. But you say he just happened to sort of come across this documentary on Austin Cable Access, and that was it. Like, in speaking to him, did you get any sense that he might have had some conspiratorial beliefs that might have led him to find this documentary more believable prior to him watching it, or was this really like a light bulb moment for him?
Yeah, I think that he didn't have a lot of conspiracy belief before that. That's the sense that I got in talking to him. It's really remarkable how a lot of these cases are very similar to each other. The Pizzagate guy who raided the pizzeria, he also was not really very much into conspiracy until he saw a documentary on Pizzagate. So he didn't have a history of that. And Richard didn't either. I mean, he had some anti-government beliefs, I would say. I think that he got a little bit bitter when he was in the Marines, as far as, you know, he was aware of actual conspiracies that happened during the 80s with Reagan and Iran-Contra and stuff like that. So, and, you know, a lot of stuff he talked to me about, like Democrats and Republicans being the same, two sides of the same coin. I was like, all right, I get that, you know. So I think that he was a little bit bitter towards the government, and he went through this tragedy, though, and it just, like, made him really vulnerable to something like that. But before that, he saw that documentary, he had not had any exploration of conspiracy.
That's super interesting. Yeah, so so what did he go on to do then after this? He decided, he saw this documentary, he decided that he believed that the Bohemian Grove was engaged in satanic ritual abuse of children. What was the follow-up?
Yeah, well, here's a really key moment, and again, it's interesting to see how these cases relate to each other, because you know, on Christmas there was the case of the guy who blew up his RV in Nashville, and I was like,
Yeah.
right away, I was like, I bet this guy was into some conspiracy thing, and sure enough, it turns out that he believed in reptilian aliens and everything. But one thing that that guy said was that 9/11 was a major turning point as far as his thinking. And that was true with Richard as well. He saw this documentary in 2000. He kind of entertained the idea of going to Bohemian Grove. Well, he wasn't really committed to it. But he says that after 9/11 happened, he was ready to go. He was ready to possibly die for this conspiracy. So it really changed his way of thinking, and I think a lot of other people too. And he slowly put this plan together over several months. He developed this Phantom Patriot persona, which it's a super creepy, kind of badass looking superhero costume. And he started collecting weapons. He had a shotgun rifle hybrid. He had a pistol, a ninja sword, and fire tubes mortar so he could fire smoke bombs, and a crossbow. I mean, he had all these weapons. And finally, he just kind of randomly decided that he was going to do it. And this is why I think Alex Jones is so culpable in this, because Alex Jones not only gave him the motivation to do this, but at the end of his documentary, he actually gives you driving instructions on how you can get to the Bohemian Grove. So Richard just followed Alex Jones's directions, went to the Grove. He was there at night. He couldn't see in the Grove, though, because the trees are so huge that they block out the moonlight and everything. And his flashlight or torch had burnt out. And so, you know, he spent the night in a cabin that he had found. And in the morning, he marched into the Bohemian Grove at sunrise. And he really wanted to, he thought that this owl statue was made out of wood, that it was carved out of a redwood tree for some reason. And he really wanted to burn this owl. Was going to be his big symbolic gesture. In addition, you know, he thought he might perhaps find a satanic ritual happening there that he could interrupt and save people. But this owl statue was made out of concrete, so he started a nearby mess hall on fire, and that triggered a fire alarm, and he soon found himself having a standoff with the Sonoma County Sheriff's Department.
He also left a left a little piece of paper at the foot of the statue, right?
Yes.
With
Yeah.
a verse from Leviticus, a
Right.
pretty on the nose verse. I can't remember it verbatim. Maybe you can, but it's about like basically don't sacrifice your kids to Moloch, right? Like that's the
Yes, exactly. That's exactly it. It was something like, don't sacrifice your kids to Moloch because I am the true God, or something like that. So yeah, he left his calling card there, and he came very close.
I think it's interesting because he must have had that printed out beforehand. Like if you see a
Yeah.
picture of it, it's like it's not like he wrote a note. It's like, yeah.
Yeah, I actually got to, before I wrapped up the book, his friend Richard had this one friend, Lon, who was pretty much his only friend in the world. But he sent me his entire Richard file, and one of the things in that file was that original note in an evidence bag that had been collected from the scene. So it was kind of trippy to be able to hold it in my hands, But yeah, he left his calling card, and then he had a very tense standoff with the police. He came very close to dying, I'm pretty sure. But eventually he, put down his weapon and he surrendered to them. And he spent about 6.5 years in jail. And then he spent another 3 years on parole. That's when he first contacted me. He was still on parole in California when I began talking to him.
And so he made some comic books of his own. I think he made them while he was in prison, correct?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there's one scene in them because he retells the Bohemian Grove raid in his comic book, The Phantom Patriot. And the scene where he is standing off with the police, I think we get a very interesting look into how he's thinking at the time. And at least from the comic book, it seems like he's trying to work out whether these people are complicit in the conspiracy theory and are just either going to kill him to shut him up, or like maybe he should try and fight them or what have you. And ultimately he decides that he's he doesn't want to be a murderer. He's not out to hurt innocent people, and these people are probably just doing their jobs. They're officers of the law and he should respect them. And so he gives himself up. But he very quickly changes his mind about that, I think, during the arrest. One of them says something, I can't remember what it is, but he seems to sort of flip and go, oh crap, they are part of the conspiracy theory. Did he ever like mention those moments to you, like what he was sort of thinking and what sort of kept him from making what's admittedly kind of a bad situation a whole ton worse?
Yeah. It's such a tense moment in his life. I just want to mention about the comic. This was when he first contacted me. I was like, "Yeah, I'm interested in talking to you." And probably a week later, he sent me a copy of that comic book and a letter explaining some stuff. But when I saw that comic book, I was like, "Wow, this is really intense." His artwork it's not bad. It's pretty good. It's just kind of weird. So I found his comic to be very interesting. And I did talk to him about that particular moment. So one thing that kind of came out later, after I'd talked to him for a couple of years, actually, he started to slowly tell me about how he was, to be blunt, he was kind of stalking this country music star named Shelley Wright. He had developed this infatuation with her in the late 90s. And after his parents died, they left him a pretty big inheritance. So he went to Nashville, and she was doing a charity auction there. But he was telling me about this, and he kept mentioning Shelley Wright. So I was like, what is this guy on about? So I did a Google search where I searched his name and I searched Shelley Wright, and I came up with one entry, and that was from MTV.com that mentioned that Richard McCaslin had won a dinner date with Shelley Wright because he threw down $14,500 to win that date. And so they went on this dinner date, and he thought that they were in love with each other, which was not true at all. And that was kind of a motivation for him staying alive, he later told me. He went to the Bohemian Grove and he was ready to die. He had kind of given up on Shelley Wright. He had all these other problems. But then at the last moment, he was like, maybe it'll work out between us or something. So I'm going to take that chance and I'm going to surrender to the police. But yeah, he was definitely, I think, going back and forth about whether he wanted to live or die at that moment, and trying to figure out if the police were part of this conspiracy. I think that he really liked the average police officer, military person, because he thought that they were part of the people that were sort of pawns in this terrible New World Order scheme. So I think he had some love for the common person. He just really despised like these rulers that we have that are sort of the puppet masters. But yeah, he surrendered to the police, and I think that he thought they were just doing their jobs. Same with a lot of people that he met during his incarceration. He just kind of accepted them for who they were.
And yeah, so he spent 6 years in prison. He penned his comics while he was in there. Again, we went over the Phantom Patriot a little bit earlier in the week as well. It was just it's a fantastic read. Like, I mean, his artwork isn't bad. It's not bad. He packs a lot into it. There's a Bible verse on every panel, at least one on every panel, if not multiple. But it's just this fascinating look into the mind of somebody who has a very particular mindset. So he was imprisoned in 2000 was it 2002, 2003, 2002?
Very early 2002.
Yeah.
And he was in prison until sometime in 2008, I think. And then he was on parole until 2011 was when.
2011, yeah. And he made a TV show after that. I don't think it ever aired. But there's quite a few episodes available on the YouTubes if you look up Richard McCaslin. And then he was found dead in his car. I think from apparently self-inflicted. It was apparently self-inflicted. Yeah. So, when did you hear about that? What did you think about it? Are there any thoughts you can offer on his death, I guess?
Yeah. I got along with Richard, and I considered him to be a friend. I mean, we had some arguments along the way. He was just very paranoid about people. So there were times he was suspicious that I was against him for some reason. And he had a hard time maintaining friendships. But, so it wasn't unusual for me to go several months without talking to him. So what happened was he, in October of 2018, he was living in Pahrump, Nevada, was the last place that he lived, which is a weird little desert town, kind of by the border between California and Nevada. But he packed up some stuff and he drove out to Washington, D.C. He parked his truck near a Freemason temple, and his truck was covered in protest signs that had different messages about the evils of the Freemasons. And then he took his own life in his truck. No one really found out about this for a few months because the police determined that his next of kin was a cousin who he didn't talk to and knew nothing about his life. So it took a few months for anyone else to find out. But this was early 2019. I got a message from Lon, who I mentioned earlier, was one of Richard's only friends. And he said, you need to call me as soon as you can. And I immediately knew that something bad had happened. And sure enough, he shared the news with me. And it was not surprising to me because I knew he had been going down this kind of very depressing path, but at the same time I didn't expect it, so it was surprising to me. And so Lon went to work and did a lot of paperwork. One of the things he was able to get, and he shared this with me, was Richard wrote sort of a last statement, I guess is what I would call it, that was found in the passenger side of the truck that he died in. And this statement sort of outlined 21 different points about conspiracies that he believed in. And he sort of called out people that were people that he didn't like, politicians. He called out Alex Jones because he thought Alex Jones was a fake person. And, he'd wrote a little bit about his motivation for going to DC and stuff like that. So it was very interesting to see his last words. And then eventually, Lon also got his remains from Washington, DC, his cremated remains. And I happened to be traveling around the same time, and I met up with Lon and a couple of his other friends out in Pahrump, and we had sort of a ceremony for him where we spread his ashes on the property that he owned out there, and said some last words for Richard McCaslin. And that was pretty much it. And then I wrapped up my book very shortly after that.
Wow. Yeah. It's always sad when something like this ends in that kind of way. I mean, ultimately, it doesn't seem like McCaslin was a bad person who was out to do anybody any kind of harm. He just believed bad things were going on.
Yeah.
And he seems to have led a relatively solitary life. And just an all round, a really quite sad story. So you say you seem to blame Alex Jones pretty heavily for that part of McCaslin's life, right? The conspiracism. And I often say, Facebook and Twitter have a lot to answer for when it comes to the rise of QAnon. Alex Jones being a little bit more fringe, but even those fringe people who we usually, who we might laugh at and just go, oh well, they're crazy, they seem ridiculous and so on to the people that don't believe them, but to the people that do believe them, they're truth seekers, right? They're on the same path and they're sharing important information to the world. So I guess I'm trying to work out where we're going from here, but leading on into the QAnon narratives and so on, what do you think are some sort of similarities? Because I mean, Alex Jones has completely disavowed QAnon at this point, right?
Yeah.
So what are what do you think is the connection there between the old conspiracism and the new, I guess, that culminates in the J6 riots?
Yeah. Well, I think just to back up on something you said that I want to share is, Richard, he was not a bad person, I don't think. And there's a lot of stuff that I liked about him and connected to. I didn't think that he was stupid. He had read a lot about U.S. history, And I thought he was very creative. He drew these comic books, he made these costumes, he produced these videos. So he had this creative mind, which I think was kind of a double-edged sword for him, because his creativity also led him to see all this deep symbolism in everything. And it really sort of became his enemy. So I think it's important. I really learned that, conspiracy theorists are people, and they have lives, and they have reasons why they've gone down that path. Seeing this stuff like with QAnon is just so remarkable because, like as you said earlier, it's such an old story. The blood libel, and this idea of a satanic pedophile ring of the elites, liberal elites, whoever those are. It just keeps getting like repackaged over the years. Richard, I think, must have been influenced by the satanic panic of the 80s, because that's when he was growing up. And that was essentially a lot of the same ideas that QAnon has today.
Yeah, and
So
you'd say you can draw that thread right the way back through to the Satanic Panic, which is sort of, I want to say is it 78 or 79 that book comes out of Canada that they're talking about? They do the regressive therapy on the woman who says that she was abused in a satanic cult when she was younger, and then basically it sort of blows up. You have the not McCaslin, some McClaskin. Sorry, it's been a couple of weeks since I talked about the Satanic Panic, but you have the McCaslin case where which really blows it up across the world, right? And that lasts throughout the Satanic Panic. You could say, some people say the Satanic Panic's never ended, but I think it's sort of, I think what's her name? I've got a book here actually. Debbie Nathan, yeah, Debbie Nathan's Satan's Silence comes out in 1995, and that kind of sees the end of it. And McCaslin committed his act in 2002, so
yeah.
I mean, he'd have lived his life through the Satanic Panic for sure.
Yes. Yeah, that book Michelle Remembers.
That's the one. Yeah.
And I didn't make this parallel in my book. I don't know why, but Richard was very influenced later. After he got out of prison, he was influenced by a book called Transformation of America by Kathy O'Brien. And it's very similar to Michelle Remembers, because she claimed that
it's the same story, basically.
Yeah,
apart from
right.
that she's sold to the CIA for mind
Right.
control. Sorry, you should say it. Really, I'll shut
Oh
up.
no. Oh no, it's okay. Yeah, they're very similar. They both were stories that, they said that they came out under hypnosis. Hypnosis is behind a lot of these pretty tall tales about people who survive government programs and alien abductions and all sorts of stuff. But Kathy O'Brien claims that she was sexually abused by Gerald Ford, George H.W. Bush, Bill and Hillary Clinton, several country music stars, the
king of
Prime
Saudi
Minister.
Arabia.
Right, right.
Like
all sorts of world names. And it's just such a, I think that something bad probably did happen to her. So I'm not trying to make fun of her, but it's so unbelievable. And she has no proof at all. And it's so strange because Richard would be highly skeptical of anything he would see in the mainstream news media. But he would read a book by Kathy O'Brien and completely believe every word of it. So, and yeah, that's the story.
It's interesting that, isn't it? Because in the Trumpist era, or whatever you want to call it, obviously fake news has become a huge narrative of those people who support Trump. They've rejected pretty much every mainstream news channel now. They were friends of Fox News for a while, but more recently, especially since Fox called, I forget, was it Arizona? they called one of the states for Biden
Yes,
anyway,
right.
and that sort
Yeah,
of,
they were done. They were done
they were
after
just
that.
like, no, OAN and Newsmax for us, and then Newsmax conceded. It's like OAN only. Yeah. So, and alternative media doesn't seem to gain the same level of scrutiny and skepticism from people who are prone to conspiracist thinking as the mainstream media does. Yeah, do you have any thoughts on why that could be? Or
Well, I mean, in this era that we're living in is just so terrible as far as misinformation, disinformation, stuff that looks like it's a legit news source, but it's complete bullshit. It's so hard to tell the difference. I get suckered by it sometimes. I keep getting suckered by this website. We got you covered or something like that, and they're always announcing news about superhero movies, and I'm like, oh wow, they cast this person, and then I'm like, oh, it's a stupid website again. This totally fooled me in my Facebook feed. So I mean, it's actual fake news, not what Trump would call fake news, but actual fake news it's just pumped out so much, and it's everywhere. So it's really hard to distinguish sometimes. So I can see why people would be confused, and especially people very much love confirmation bias. So if you see a news report that feels right in your gut, the chances that you're going to believe it because it just reaffirms what you already believe. So, and that's really how conspiracy has evolved into such a dangerous thing, because everyone's online now, and it's everywhere online. So it's really hard to avoid, and a lot of social media platforms will try to crack down on it, but they usually do long after it's a problem. For example, when I was working on this book, I went to a flat Earth conference, which was quite an experience. And but one study that I read, there were some scientists who had gone to flat Earth conferences and interviewed people, and they found that almost 100% of flat Earthers developed those beliefs because of YouTube. They got pushed down a YouTube rabbit hole. So, and then eventually YouTube did crack down on flat Earth content, but by that time there was already an entire subculture revolving around it. They have conferences and media, and they even have their own flat Earth hip hop scene. So
it's wild. Yeah, I was in a flat Earth server for a little while because I wanted to take a break from looking at Nazis, which is what I was doing before that. Turns out, you sort of dig deep enough, and the same threads are just there everywhere. It's all JQ stuff, and that brings us to one of the questions somebody in chat asked, actually. So Rumor Flies, who kind of connected us, wanted to know if you thought that Richard McCaslin, the Phantom Patriot, do you think he, Rumor Flies puts it as, did he adhere to the JQ? I guess, like, yeah, how obviously the conspiracy theories he believed in, we can see as somebody, as people who are familiar with them, that they are, there's a very thin veneer painted over the underlying anti-Semitism that's present in all these sort of like Masonic conspiracy theories, Illuminati conspiracy theories, etc. Do you think that is something that Richard McCaslin himself realized, or do you think he was sort of consciously anti-Semitic in any way?
I think that perhaps he was unconsciously a little bit. I think that he wasn't aware of where some of the ideas that he believed in came from. I don't think that he was racist or had ill will towards any group of people. But, for example, one time he was telling me about how he was surprised that someone had told him that his idea was anti-Semitic, and he was like, I'm not, though. I'm just against Zion, the state of Zion, and Zionists. And I was like, well, you see how those two are related, though, because Israel is a nation of Jewish people. So I don't think that he was racist, but I think that he unconsciously spread some of those ideas. What was really interesting about him in his last statement is that he was so deep into conspiracy theory that he had conspiracy theories about conspiracy theories. So he, for example, thought that QAnon he described it as a PSYOP program, a government PSYOP program that was created to, I guess, discredit real conspiracy theorists like him. So he did not believe in QAnon. He was not a fan of Trump at all. He thought Trump was a reptilian alien, much like all of the other world leaders.
Yeah, that was one of the other questions in chat, actually. Flamdar did ask, because we focused in on that when, in the Phantom Patriot comic, he has Donald Trump listed as one of the people that he believes is part of this satanic elite that are engaging in these activities at the Bohemian Grove. And I guess the question Flamdar asked was, did he ever warm up to Trump or the QAnon conspiracy theory? But I guess that's something you've answered for us.
No, his very last statement that he wrote, which I got to read and was, in the passenger seat of his truck, he specifically called out QAnon as a government PSYOP program. And one of his 21 points was calling out Trump. And he said that Trump was a reptilian and that he had also engaged in incest with his daughter, Ivanka. So that was one of his final words was calling out Trump and QAnon.
Fair enough. And I suppose one more question for me. We talk a lot in this space about how fucking sad it is, honestly, when somebody somebody you love, sort of goes down these rabbit holes and these conspiracy theories just sort of take over their lives, and people have described it as like losing a wife or a daughter or a friend or what have you. And we're always looking for ways that maybe we can help the people in those movements to reclaim their lives from this obsession. Do you think, did you learn anything from your relationship with Richard McCaslin? Do you think there was anything that could have been done either on an individual or on a societal level that would have either prevented him going in or made it easier for him to have a more normal life?
Yeah, it's something I've thought about a lot. Even during that January 6th insurrection, I had friends on social media that were like, good, arrest them all. Who cares if some of those people died? But I felt bad. There was a woman who was part of that crowd, and she was a QAnon believer. And she, I read a report about her, how she had drug problems, but she was turning her life around and wanted to be a counselor, actually. But she had also fallen down this QAnon rabbit hole. And she was the one who got trampled to death at that event. And I was just like, what a waste, that person could have had a productive life and could have helped other people out. So it's very sad. And like you said, there's a lot of reports out there where you can read about people who have severed their relationship with their parents or their friends or their spouse or partner. So it's very damaging. These beliefs are very damaging. I don't know what can be done. It's very difficult because once someone crosses a certain line, it's very difficult for them to come back from that, I think. Because you can show them all sorts of evidence, like flat Earth, for example. How are you going to talk someone out of believing that the Earth is flat? You can't show them pictures or video or scientific reports because they're going to say that all of that is, a government fake. So it's very frustrating. I think that the only things that can be done, number one, I hope that our education system is working in classes or programs that are going to help people with media literacy, as far as um, finding out what sources are good for information and which ones are bad, how you can spot conspiracy or fake information. You know, I can take the class and learn about that stupid superhero site that keeps fooling me. Uh, so education, I think that this needs to be addressed as being kind of a national health emergency, really. The government or someone needs to start committees and programs that explore like how they can help stop this constant barrage of fake information. And personally, you know, I think that people understandably have this reaction like, you're a conspiracy idiot, I don't want to talk to you. But I think that's, and something I feel guilty about with Richard is that maybe just having a more solid human connection could have helped this guy out. You know, if you just, like, people talk to him.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I usually recommend is that, you know, I mean, it can be exhausting having a family member who's involved in you know, any kind of cultic environment or cultic beliefs, especially if those beliefs mean that they think that you're engaged in some sort of evil activity.
Yeah.
But if you do have the energy, I think keeping a path open, like back towards normality, is incredibly important. It doesn't mean that they're going to leave ever, possibly, but at least you keep the way open for them, because if you just leave them isolated to the cult, like, then they have no chance at all, I feel. So, yeah. I think Richard's probably lucky to have had somebody like you in his life to sort of, be at least vaguely rational.
I wish there's a couple times that I knew him where I felt and I hoped that he was finding something that was engaging him other than these conspiracy theories. You know, he made a connection.
Other relationships, other interests. These just something else to find important to relieve some of their attention from. I mean, it does. I describe it as an obsession because it does seem to just take people over entirely. It's all they want to think about. All they want to
Absolutely.
talk about.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. You're absolutely right. And like I said, he had some talent. I wish he could have channeled that more into creating art. You know, developing a small social circle, something like that. But it just kind of overtook his whole life, and it was very sad.
Well, you know, we're coming up to the end of our hour now. I think we've gone a little bit over, actually. Is there anything else that you would like to add on the end before we sort of wrap up and can promote your book afterwards, obviously, as well? Because I think everybody should read it. I think it's a great read. I'm only sort of 3/4 of the way through it at the moment, but I'll finish it up soon. Yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to add on? Anything you feel we've missed in the story or the narrative?
I think that we covered a lot of it. You know, this book ended up being about an interesting person that I kind of randomly met, but I think it really expanded into the bigger conspiracy culture. And when you read the book, you'll read about a lot of people that are still in the news a lot, like Alex Jones and other conspiracy theorists. So it kind of shows you a little bit of how we got here.
Okay, so that book is American Madness, the story of the Phantom Patriot and how conspiracy theories hijacked American consciousness, by Tea Krulos, who we're talking to now. I'm going to put an Amazon link in chat, but if you hate Amazon, I'm sure there's other places that you can buy it from. Definitely read. It's really just really engaging stuff. And I love that you are, you don't engage with this as a lot of sort of gonzo journos might do, in a wow, look at this freak show. You're very sort of empathetic and sort of trying to help us really to know this man and why he went down the path that he did.
Yeah, I absolutely, never wanted to make fun of him or anything like that. I just wanted to tell his story, which I really genuinely think is interesting. It takes all these weird twists and turns throughout his life. But yeah, book's available anywhere. I always recommend people go to bookshop.org. It's a cool site because they kick some money back to independent bookstores. You can also go to my website, teakrulos.com. Has links to my book and everything else I've done.
That's awesome. I appreciate that. And I guess one last wholesome question, just because I saw it in chat. Did Richard have a favorite superhero?
He had a few. He said that his favorite superheroes were Batman, Captain America, and the Phantom. Who's kind of... They did a 90s movie with the Phantom, but he's one of the few superhero properties that they haven't redeveloped recently, but they probably will. So those were his top ones, but he had a huge comic book collection. He went to the comic book store every Wednesday to get new books, and he read the whole gamut, DC, Marvel, independent comics.
That's awesome. Okay, thank you so much for your time, T. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna hang up now, and we'll have like a little mini chat with chat. But yes, thank you so much for your time, and obviously you're welcome to hit me up anytime if you wanna chat.
Great, thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Peace, friend.